Hi everyone, welcome back to the Mind Body Heart podcast. My name is Mia Schick, registered holistic nutritionist. In today's podcast episode, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is blood sugar regulation. I always say that if you want your biggest return, you need to be focusing on balanced blood sugar levels. So today we're going to be diving into what it means and what I'm talking about when we say blood sugar and blood sugar balance, why it matters and why it's so important for your hormone health, your weight, your cravings, and how you can better support your blood sugar. So this is really foundational stuff, foundational pieces. So whether you're trying to lose weight or just have more energy or stabilize your hormones, then this episode is for you. First and foremost, what do I mean when I say blood sugar? Blood sugar essentially just means how much glucose is in our bloodstream at a given time. Glucose is the main form of sugar that is circulating in our bloodstream, and that's what our body likes to utilize as energy. Glucose can come from obviously the foods that we eat, primarily foods that are higher in carbohydrates, so things like bread and fruit and rice, sweets, candies, those sorts of things. Protein can convert to glucose via a process called gluconeogenesis, and also from stored glycogen. So we store some glucose in our liver as a backup. When it comes to blood sugar, we don't want it to be super high and we don't want it to be super low. Our body likes our blood sugar to be relatively stable at most points throughout the day. We'll talk about some different things around that as we go, like purposely spiking your blood sugar before a workout to utilize that glucose, but that's going to be beside the point for today. So we want it to be kept in a safe range, not too high, not too low. Why this matters is because if our blood sugar swings too high or too low, it impacts the energy, the cravings, the mood, our metabolism, and our hormones. So I'll give you some examples a little bit further on of different foods and different combinations and how they directly impact your blood sugar. One of the things that I hear all the time when I talk to clients about blood sugar, there's a little bit of misinformation or misunderstanding about what it is. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about blood sugar. Well, my blood sugar's fine. I went and got my blood sugar checked at my doctor and it came back within the range. We'll talk about labs a little bit further along as well and what to look for there. This is where some people get confused. There's a big difference just between a single fasting glucose test. Most often when you go and get your blood sugar levels tested, they will often test your glucose, insulin levels first thing in the morning at a fasted state. We'll also check your hemoglobin A1C, which is the average of what your blood glucose levels have been doing over the past 3 months. So there's a big difference between just testing at a singular point in time versus what your blood sugar regulation looks like over a 12-hour period. So that single lab test, that text tells us what our blood sugar was doing at that one moment, typically around 8 to 12 hours without any food. It does not tell us how high our blood sugar is spiking after meals, or if it is crashing after that meal, how much insulin our body has had to release, and how we can actually stabilize those levels throughout the majority of the day. So you can have normal fasting glucose or fasting insulin levels, normal A1C, and still have major blood sugar swings. And those swings are what are going to impact your symptoms. I did want to talk about insulin for a minute and explain what it is and the difference between insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity. Insulin, what it is a hormone that is produced by the pancreas, and it's produced in response to the food that we eat, more or less depending on the types of food that we eat. So if we eat more carbohydrates, more insulin will get released. When it comes to insulin resistance means that our cells are not able to uptake glucose as well as they should. So insulin's job is it pairs up with glucose molecules, it comes up to the cell and acts like a key to let that glucose into the cell to be utilized as energy. So it teams up with glucose, knocks on the door, hi cell, I got some energy here for you, can I come in? Yeah, sure. Glucose enters the cell, utilizes energy, all is good. With insulin resistance, that insulin and glucose molecule are hanging out of the cell, knocking on the door. The cell's going, no thank you, you cannot come in here. For multiple different reasons. Sometimes this can be over a long term of eating a higher refined, high sugar carbohydrate diet. The cell kind of goes, we just there's too much coming in here, we're going to get damaged, so we're just going to close the doors. It can also be coupled with high stress levels. It can be genetics, poor sleep. There can be hormonal issues like PCOS, hormonal shifts in menopause, which we'll talk about a little bit. So there's multiple reasons why insulin resistance can happen. In a nutshell, that just means that our cells are not uptaking glucose as well as they should. Then what happens is we get a surplus of glucose in our system, hyperglycemia. In a lot of cases, when that glucose has nowhere else to go, our cells aren't utilizing, sometimes it can get stored as excess weight. So it's very common for weight gain to be a byproduct of insulin resistance, and again, very common in cases like PCOS and menopause and type 2 diabetes. Insulin sensitivity means that our cells are receptive to insulin and are uptaking that glucose as well as they should. So we want our cells to be insulin sensitive. Let's talk about what actually influences our blood sugar. It's actually a lot more than just what we eat. We commonly think, well, it's just all correlated with our food, but our body also has other mechanisms that help to control and regulate our blood glucose levels as well. So things, obviously, what we eat, we're going to be delving into that even more as we go. But if we're having more carbohydrates or more protein or more fiber, that can influence our blood sugar, our meal timing. So how often we are consuming food. Are we fasting for long periods? Are we going long periods in between our meals? Those sorts of things. Stress is a big one. What happens when our stress levels or cortisol levels elevate? This can raise our blood sugar. What happens is we get that alarm response going on. The brain detects that there's something in our environment that is impeding our survival, and we need to either run or fight whatever is going on. So we need energy in order to do that. Cortisol rises, tells the liver to release that stored glycogen, that stored sugar, to bring blood sugar levels up so that we have that energy, right? Most of us aren't actually running or fighting that stressor in the environment. So maybe we're sitting at our desk, we have a work deadline due or something like that, or we're studying for an exam, and our cortisol levels are elevated. Oftentimes we're not actually burning off that excess glucose, so sometimes it can get stored as weight. Or you have the reverse where it just puts you on that blood sugar roller coaster when now you've spiked your blood sugar and then you crash later, crave more sugar and carbs, etc. Poor sleep is another one. So not getting enough sleep can really impact our insulin sensitivity. Higher sugar cravings, higher carbohydrate cravings, exercise and movement. We'll talk about these a little bit in further detail. So muscle really helps to soak up excess glucose. And so lower muscle mass can mean that we have potentially more blood sugar swings. Hormone balance, thyroid, estrogen, progesterone, they all can influence insulin sensitivity. So if we have, it's kind of a catch-22. If our insulin levels are off, it'll directly impact our sex hormones. And if our sex hormones are off, it impacts our insulin sensitivity. Basically, your body's ability to handle sugar is a dance between lifestyle, hormones, and diet. I want to break down into why blood sugar matters so much for so many different aspects of our overall health. As I mentioned at the beginning, when we focus on blood sugar, your mood is better, your energy is better, your focus is better, you have less anxiety, less stress. You're better able to manage your weight, your hunger, your cravings. So just what I said at the beginning, this is a place that you should be investing a lot of time into because it's going to affect all of those things. I start with clients. This is what we work through for the first 4, even upwards of 6 weeks when I begin to work with somebody in my 3-month program. We look at regulating our blood sugar levels, balancing out meals, eating enough protein, etc. Let's talk about why and how blood sugar influences different things like weight and hormones and energy and mood and even things like ADHD. We'll start with weight loss. With weight loss, the primary driver of weight loss is being in a calorie deficit. This essentially means that your body is burning more calories than you're consuming, right? Burning more calories, more energy than we're bringing in. As we often know, if you've ever been on a weight loss journey and you've tried cutting your calories back, your appetite can get out of control, your cravings for sugars can get out of control. One way to help mitigate that and make that easier to manage is by regulating your blood sugar. It can help regulate that appetite. Stable glucose, reduce those spikes in especially ghrelin, which is one of our hunger hormones. Very important. And the other side of it too is when we have those rapid blood sugar swings, when our blood sugar spikes too high and then drops, that can trigger cravings for sugar and carbs and snacks. GLP, glucagon-like peptide 1, these are gut hormones that help to signal fullness. Commonly know you think of these as the medications, but our body actually naturally produces glucagon-like peptide 1 in the gut. And when our blood sugar spikes, it actually can blunt GLP-1 production, in decreasing our satiety after meals, therefore making us hungrier and overeating, contributing to that weight. Metabolic efficiency. Stable glucose supports energy use and fat metabolism. It's very important for thyroid health. For hormonal support, hormones are a big driver in our weight. Please do not listen to anybody who say that the hormones have zero effect on weight. It's just simply not true. We cannot take those out of the equation. Blood sugar is really important for our thyroid production. Thyroid is that little butterfly gland that's located in the neck. And thyroid hormones are responsible for our metabolism, amongst some other things as well. Blood pressure and heat regulation, temperature regulation. But low or fluctuating blood sugar can signal stress and slow down that thyroid hormone conversion. Cortisol, so as we mentioned, those blood sugar swings can spike cortisol, which can drive fat storage, especially in the abdominal area. And then sex hormones. Insulin resistance and blood sugar swings can disrupt estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. That can make things like PMS, menopausal symptoms, our libido, and fat distribution an issue for some people. Bottom line, if blood sugar is all over the place, everything from appetite to fat burning to hormone health is going to be affected. Before we go any further, I want to give you some visuals that you can start to think about of what some examples of high blood sugar or foods that might spike your blood sugar versus foods that are good, and what happens when your blood sugar goes too long. I don't think I'll be able to show you one here, but I usually show a blood sugar roller coaster. I'll actually share this over on Instagram, so if you want a more visual of what I'm talking about here, go check that out. But we talk about the blood sugar roller coasters, blood sugar spiking and then dropping. To give you some examples of meal ideas, or meals that might do this, one would be having carbohydrates essentially on their own and lacking of a lot of fiber, a lot of fat. And that might look like maybe in the morning you're having a bowl of oatmeal with some banana and some milk. You got a little bit of fiber in the oats and you have a little bit of protein, but this is going to be primarily carbohydrates. Another one might be maybe you're stopping at Starbucks and grabbing your favorite sweet coffee drink and a muffin, or maybe you're having a piece of toast with jam on it, or just a bowl of cereal. Those foods are mostly carbohydrates. Carbohydrates on their own, when they're not paired with a fiber or protein or fat, they tend to digest quite quickly. We digest those carbohydrates quickly, and then we get access to that energy quite quickly as well, right? So digest that food, and then all of a sudden our body gets all of this glucose in its system, and it goes great. We have all of this energy. What are we going to do with it, essentially, right? We have all this glucose in our system, but maybe we're just driving in our car or we're sitting down at our desk to go to work. We're not actually utilizing that energy and burning it off. The body utilizes as much glucose as it can in the time being for normal bodily functions. To be able to think, our brain utilizes a ton of glucose, about 20% actually of our daily intake for thinking and computing things. And then it utilizes what it can. It'll store some as our backup. We talked about that in the beginning, as our liver storing glycogen. Glycogen is stored, the storage form of glucose that's stored in our liver, and we store some in our muscles. And those have kind of a cap. They only can get stored up so much. We can't put all of our excess glucose there. Then anything left over typically gets stored as excess weight. Now, this might look differently if you were going to go for a run. If you are going to run a 10K, or maybe you're training for a half marathon, then you actually do want higher levels of glucose so that you have that energy to burn off and you have access to that energy quite quickly. But for the majority of people, we're just kind of talking on a day-to-day basis here. Those are some examples. This is going to be primarily foods that are higher in carbohydrates. I don't want to demonize carbohydrates, but just lacking in pairing them with protein, fiber, and fat. When we have foods and meals that contain all those macronutrients and contain a certain amount of protein and fiber and fats, this slows down digestion and how fast our stomach is emptying. It's almost like we're digesting a little bit getting access to that bit of energy, and our body goes, cool, we can use this. Okay, we're going to digest a little bit more. Here's a little bit more energy. Great. I think of it as like a drip. Like, let's say you're getting an IV. You want a slow drip, right? You want a slow drip into the system. We don't want to drain that whole IV bag into our system at once. That's not going to be good. That's too much. We want that slow drip. It's kind of the same when we thinking about our meals and how we're spreading those out through the day. Again, this is going to differ from nutrition pertaining to like exercise and workouts. In some cases, you might actually want to purposely spike your blood sugar so you have that energy, but we'll talk about that in a different podcast. Just to give you some visuals, and again, I will put a chart over on Instagram if you want to have an idea of what that actually looks like on the blood sugar roller coaster. I did want to touch on blood sugar and things like ADHD and anxiety. There's such a powerful connection between blood sugar and ADHD and anxiety. Specifically for ADHD, the brain needs steady glucose for dopamine production, for focus, for executive function, impulse control. And when our blood sugar levels crash, that can make distractibility worse. It increase impulsivity, increase emotional reactivity, and also increase food noise. So if you're somebody that is thinking about food all the time, you eat your meal, you're thinking about food again, you want to come back and regulate your blood sugar. In some cases with ADHD, spikes can actually create temporary hyperfocus, but then it's going to be followed by a crash in brain fog. Insulin resistance can also, so we talked about insulin resistance can alter dopamine signaling. Dopamine dysregulation impacts cravings and reward seeking. For ADHD brains, especially, skipping meals, high sugar snacks, protein deficient breakfasts are not a good idea. Similar with anxiety as well. When blood sugar levels drop too low or too low for too long, that can trigger that cortisol response, which can increase our anxiety. Blood sugar is very, very important for mood, for regulating anxiety, and energy levels especially. Energy is a big one as well. If you are somebody that experiences things like afternoon crashes, I want you to look at what you're having before that crash. Usually it's around 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you have had a low protein breakfast, low fiber breakfast, low protein lunch, low fiber lunch, most likely it's going to be your blood sugars that are dropping in the afternoon, making you feel tired and reach for the chocolate bars. Other thing that can happen too is sometimes blood sugar dysregulation affecting our sleep. So if you're somebody that maybe wakes up in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes that can be correlated with a drop in blood sugar. And again, that blood sugar increases cortisol, so that process actually wakes you up in the middle of the night. So let's talk about some practical recommendations that you can utilize in order to better support your blood sugar levels. The first and foremost thing I'm going to talk about is protein. Talk about protein. It's all over the place right now. Protein. And it's for a good reason. Because protein helps to stabilize glucose, it reduces cravings and supports our overall hormone health. Just what I mentioned, protein takes a long time to break down and to digest. It slows down that whole process and keeps you satiated and fuller for longer. My rough guideline for women is about 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight per day. That might seem like a lot, especially if you are under eating and all of a sudden now you're eating a ton of protein. Is just go slow and maybe aim for around 80 to 100 grams of protein to start, and then you can adjust depending on what your goals are, whether that's wanting to put on some muscle mass, lose weight, or maintain weight, especially as we get older. Ideally, you want protein to be at every single meal. There are going to be times where it's not going to be perfect. Or maybe you're just not feeling like it. Maybe you're sick. Maybe you're going out to dinner on the weekend and you're having pizza or pasta and it's not protein heavy. It's not what you do once in a while. It's what you do the majority of the time that is going to matter. Sometimes I have meals that aren't completely balanced, and that's okay. I don't do that all the time because I know how I feel afterwards, but it's what we do the majority of the time that's going to make the biggest difference. Protein first, so ideally what I recommend is to aim for around 25, 30, upwards of 35, even 40 grams of protein at your main meal. meals, especially at breakfast. If there's any place that you're going to emphasize having protein at, have it at breakfast. So what you have or what you do not have at the beginning of the day sets the stage for how the rest of your day is going to go. Protein at breakfast has been shown over and over and over to regulate our hunger hormones, regulate cortisol levels, increase satiety, help with blood sugar, help with crashes later on in the day. So please make sure, if anything, you're eating a high protein breakfast. I wanted to just touch, while we're on the topic of breakfast, on intermittent fasting. There's lots of conversation around intermittent fasting, good or bad for hormone health. Do we need to do it for weight loss? My opinion on it has gone back and forth over the years. I'm not opposed to intermittent fasting, but it needs to be actually done the correct way. I'm actually not a fan of skipping breakfast and then having your first meal be at noon and then going until 8 o'clock. I think what is actually better and more natural is to pull that window back, have a good protein-rich breakfast, and just pulling your eating window back a little bit at night. That's just more natural. We don't necessarily need a ton of energy as we're winding down in the night and going to bed. And actually, fasting can be very beneficial for regulating our glucose levels, especially if you are allowing for around 12 to 14, upwards of 16 hours between your last meal and your first meal a day. That doesn't mean that everybody needs to do this by any means. Sometimes it can be beneficial for people with insulin resistance, but you want to be doing it properly and making sure you're well fed and you have your balanced meals out there as well. Fiber intake. Fiber is really important, just as important as protein, again, for many reasons. Things like digestive health, having regular bowel movement, supporting a good microbiome. But fiber, actually soluble fiber, helps to slow down sugar absorption, preventing those big glucose spikes. Ideally, we want to aim for around 25 to 35 grams per day. It's different from protein, where it's 25 to 35 grams per meal. This is 25 to 35 grams per day of fiber. Some really good examples here. I love chia and ground flaxseed. Those are probably two of my favorite sources of fiber. So adding those things to yogurt bowls, smoothie bowls, oats, and those sorts of things. I'm also a really big fan of psyllium husk. I love psyllium husk. It's so good for blood sugar support, increasing satiety, good for constipation, loose stools. You can get that from your local health food store and just start with a small amount, around a teaspoon. Really good. Eating more beans and more lentils. My usual goal is to have at least 1 to 2 meals per week that are more plant-based and have more beans and lentils in them. Oats are another one. Oats are not to be demonized. Yes, they are higher in carbohydrates. The key with oats, if you're having oats in the morning, is you need to pair them with some more fiber, or sorry, not more fiber, but more fat and more protein. So bump up those oats, have a couple eggs on the side, add some Greek yogurt, stir in a scoop of protein powder, add some chia seeds in there if you want, a little bit of nut butter, right? Just to balance those out, and they'll give it more staying power. And then non-starchy vegetables. These are going to be anything that's green, broccoli, cauliflower, those cruciferous vegetables, leafy greens, asparagus, cucumber, zucchini, those sorts of things. Those are low in carbohydrates, high fiber, and high nutrients. So make half of your plate non-starchy vegetables. Let's talk about carbohydrates for a second. I feel like I always get questions around carbohydrates, or that people, especially when they're on a weight loss journey, wanting to avoid carbohydrates. The thing here is, with carbohydrates, we don't want to be afraid of them. They're absolutely essential, especially for women. I do think it's really important for overall hormone health. If you're going too low carbohydrate, it can really influence your thyroid hormones, and also things like serotonin and dopamine at the same time. Important to have carbohydrates in the diet. We just want to be choosing the right one. Ideally complex carbs that have a little bit more fiber in them. So we talked about some of them already: oats, beans, lentils, quinoa, rice, fruit, especially fruits like pears and apples and berries. Those are going to have a little bit more fiber in them as well, less sugar in there. And then we just want to pair it with a fat or a protein, right? A good rule of thumb is to think no naked carbs. If you're having a carbohydrate, pair it with something else. Even as simple, if you're wanting some bread, maybe that bread's coming out when you go out for dinner, put some butter on it, or dip it in the oil and olive oil, right? Or if you're going to have a muffin, put a little bit of butter on it, or have a protein shake with it. or have those sweet foods like desserts, have them after you've had a solid meal. It's going to help blunt glucose spikes. Let's talk about some lifestyle supports. So as we mentioned, sleep can really influence insulin sensitivity. Please make sure that you have a good nighttime routine. You're sleeping between 7 to 9 hours per night. If it is available to you, moms who have little kids, I feel for you. You just got to do the best you can, and I would really just double down on making sure that your meals are balanced if your sleep is out of your control. Stress management, so leaning on things like breath work, maybe journaling, doing some gentle movement like yoga or going for walks. Movement after meals can be incredibly supportive for glucose regulations. Glucose regulation, so even a walk for 10 to 20 minutes. What I kind of say, you don't necessarily have to go out for a walk after every single meal. If you have a meal that is a little bit heavier, or if dinner's your larger meal, going for a walk after dinner might be a great idea. Always easier to do in the summertime. I know we're in the middle of winter here still, but can be very helpful. Resistance training. So building muscle improves insulin sensitivity. So as I mentioned, muscle helps to sop up that excess glucose in our system. It's very, very important to have adequate muscles. Ladies, especially as we age, we tend to lose muscle, which can influence our metabolism. Really important to do some strength training and prioritize protein in order to maintain that muscle mass. A couple other hacks that you can utilize: adding some vinegar or acidity to your meals can help further delay gastric emptying. So vinegar, you can do apple cider vinegar. Any vinegar actually works. Either consuming some in 1 to 2 tablespoons in about half of a cup of room temperature water around 30 minutes before meals can give you a 2-for-1, can be helpful for blood sugar, but also good for digestion. It helps bring up that acidity, that digestive fire. And then 2, you get that blood sugar support with that delayed gastric emptying. You can also just add things like a vinaigrette onto your meals or a little bit of lemon onto your meals as well to add that acidity. You can also do things like eating your vegetables first, so starting your meal with a salad before progressing on to like a pasta dish, for example. Vegetables kind of help blunt that glucose response. You can also eat protein first, but honestly, if you're having meals that consume and you're eating, have all those things in it, I think you're going to be okay. You don't necessarily have to be really diligent on the way that you're eating your meals, because sometimes that can take the enjoyment out of it, at least for me anyways. Other things you can do, actually viewing morning sun in the morning. We talk about this a lot for cortisol regulation, but it actually can be really important for insulin signaling. So it kind of tells our cells to wake up, they're ready and available to take up that energy that we're getting from our food. Almost eat with the daylight, right? Eat in the morning when the sun is coming up, and reducing our consumption as we head into the evening, as our insulin sensitivity starts to decrease as the day goes on as well. Front loading your carbohydrates earlier in the day and around workouts can be another strategy, especially if you are insulin resistant. So clients that have PCOS, or stubborn weight in their menopausal years, type 2 diabetes, that could be a strategy to have more carbohydrates at your breakfast and your lunch. Going a little bit lower carb at nighttime can be a great strategy for regulating blood sugar. There are some supplements that can be very beneficial for regulating glucose levels. Magnesium is a big one. I like magnesium bisglycinate, taking in at night, good for the nervous system, but it also helps with glucose metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism. Chromium is another mineral that can help with insulin sensitivity. Berberine is one. At some point it was kind of touted as the GLP-1, nature's Ozempic. And it can be really helpful for supporting blood sugar, again, especially with clients that have insulin resistance. So ideally with berberine, because it is also antimicrobial, it can influence your gut bugs. You don't want to be taking this one for long term. Typically, you want to be cycling this one on and off, and potentially utilizing with other ones. I have used that one with PCOS clients, insulin resistant clients. Inositol would be another one. I primarily use that with PCOS clients. Inositol is a B vitamin that helps cells uptake glucose and regulate our insulin levels. Probiotics and just doing overall gut support just can help influence glucose handling and also that GLP-1 production in the gut. So really important to look after our digestive system. But all that to say, none of these in by themselves are going to be the thing that is going to move the needle. Especially if you are looking to lose weight, you need to have a combination of lifestyle and then include some of these supplements on top of it. So testing, as I mentioned, you can go and get some blood work done. I always recommend this, especially if you have any signs of insulin resistance or blood sugar dysregulation. The basic labs that you're going to be looking at are fasting glucose, fasting insulin. These are in the morning, done after an 8 to 12 hour fast, no food, no coffee, and hemoglobin A1C. So that's the average of what your blood glucose levels have been doing over the past 3 months. Continuous glucose monitors are something that I get asked about quite frequently, whether or not you can utilize that in your on your health journey, especially from a blood sugar standpoint. This just is a little device that you put on your arm, and it continuously monitors how much glucose is in your system at any given time. You download an app and you can log your food on there, and then you can make a correlation by which foods may have potentially spiked your blood sugar or not. I've had clients that are diabetic, and this has been really helpful for pinpointing which foods may or may not work for that client and just how to balance out their meals a little bit better. I do think there can be a time and a place for CGMs for sure. The thing that I want you to think about if you are getting your blood work done and you're like, oh yeah, everything's good, is just you want to really look at functional ranges when it comes to blood work. These are often a lot narrower than standard labs. This can help identify subtle dysregulation before it becomes full-on insulin resistance. So if you're looking at that reference range, find the midpoint and see where you stand. Are you on the lower end or on the higher upper end? That might mean that your blood sugar needs some more support and needs some more attention on it. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here. So as I mentioned, blood sugar isn't just about carbs. It's about hormones, it's about stress, sleep, and also our muscle mass. Stable blood sugar can help reduce cravings, give us better energy, hormone health, easier weight management. So key strategies that you want to think about: protein at every meal, fiber, making half your plate non-starchy vegetables, or just thinking about adding more color to your plate, making sure you get enough sleep, getting some movement in, managing your stress levels, and testing can really help you see what's actually happening in your body. I hope you found this episode helpful and gave you a better understanding of what it means when we were speaking about blood sugar levels. It's my favorite topic. It was absolutely life-changing for me when I shift my mindset from just like calories to balancing my meals out, eating proper things, what to include at my meals. It transformed my energy, my mood, my hormone health, and it stabilized my weight, all without having to actually count calories at the same time. So I'm a huge fan of it. I talk about it with every single client. I always joke that I should have a little jar on the side of my desk for how many, and put something in it for every time I talk about blood sugar throughout a day, because it's just so important. If you found it helpful, make sure you share it with a friend. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast already, new episodes drop every single week. Let me know what you thought. If you have any questions, I'm always open on Instagram, or you can drop a comment below, and I will catch you guys next